Hi, my name's Robyn Schulkowsky, and I'm here today with Kaylee to speak about primarily two composers in the history of percussion music. One is John Cage, and the other is Christian Wolff. Both of these men, musicians, are people that I've worked rather closely with. One is no longer on the planet. The other one is 85 this year. Mr. Cage was in some way a teacher of Mr. Wolff, and he was certainly a role model for him. And it was because of a lot of efforts that Cage made it for himself and for music, I think we are able to do things that we can do today together. This chapter is going to be more about space and place, and I'm thinking space and place because it allows us to root what we're doing in history. It also allows us to place it in time, and it's two concepts that we need in music. How do we invite a space? How do we occupy a space? How do we stimulate a space? And what does the placement of sounds in the space do to make that possible? That all sounds really complicated, but if you're a drummer, a percussionist, you're thinking about those things all the time because our instruments don't really exist until we create them. So historically, with Mr. Cage, the instruments were things that you've probably seen before with the Speak People and with Kaylee. Porcelain bowls, tea kettles, blenders, water, bathtubs, which you may have also seen already. But to refer to maybe the very beginning of this thing was John Cage had an amazing sense of possible musics. As a student of Schoenberg's, he was a failure because he knew he just couldn't understand harmony. He also never believed that it was that important, which puts him back as a writer for percussion, because traditional harmony is something that just flies out the window when you start working with us. The idea of pitch, harmony, melody also doesn't exist when you work with us. It's probably one of the things that keep us able to communicate with each other at all. One of the things I want to refer to is the water walk, and it was on national television in my country in 1960 in a show called I've Got a Secret, which we actually saw in South Dakota. We only had 2 channels in South Dakota in 1960. We didn't have a TV then, but we did see that show later. So I missed this one, 60, till it came out on YouTube. But Mr. Cage goes on the air with a piece that's through composed, which we'll just show you a page of that, called Water Walk. And it's through composed using a stopwatch. This has become kind of a normal thing for us now, musicians, in that a lot of music is done with a stopwatch and not with a metronome anymore, or even without a conductor. Hooray, hooray. But the stopwatch was his way of creating a score in real time, and I think necessary because of the actions and the spaces between the actions and the beginning of what we would call silence in music. This is important. Silence. Space and place and where we are. And for me, working with John Cage was where I learned how to be still. And it's amazing because he had to learn how to do that too. I've seldom met somebody as active and as creative as John. He would work. I can't do this. He worked in airports. He could work all the time. And he did, because he said the older he got, the more he had to work, because he said when every birthday comes up, he's got all these things. Everybody wants another premiere. So the older he got, the more he had to work. So the more efficient he had to become. But in all that efficiency, he taught musicians how to be still. how to embrace the space, how to respect the material, how to discover the integrity within, how to use a watch and time to create the place where we can make music. And I am continually in awe of this lesson because it goes on and on and on. Thanks to John, I met David Tudor and Christian Wolff. And everybody likes to say that there was a New York School of Music because there was at about the same time, there was a New York School of Painting when people still painted. And it's true that many of the painters of the New York School had something to do with the music that was happening at the time. Rauschenberg did the sets and the costumes for Merce's dance events, which were always accompanied by John Cage's music. There was an amazing connection of the arts, which I think fed the creative potential of the time that still makes us a little bit sad when we think back, because we're thinking, why can't we do that today? What do we need to be able to listen and communicate and look and feel with each other? So the New York School of Composers is now cleverly been reduced, I think, to 4 names: John Cage, Earl Brown, Morton Feldman, and Christian Wolff. And the one who's still with us is Christian Wolff, who insists that he was never even part of the New York School because he was too young, and then he was in Boston. So he went to college at Harvard. He wasn't even in New York when all that was happening. He was a kid. But he did some of the first concerts at Harvard that these people played, and the connection goes way back to his youth. Even though he was born in France during the war, his family settled in New York, and that's where he grew up, on Washington Square. Maybe how you get to be a composer if your parents are book publishers. Also an amazing crossover that you spend your life with the best minds of the time sitting at your kitchen table because your mother cooked dinner at the same table that your parents put together the books. So the intellectual community of his life was so normal that I think everything that he did that was creative, he did thinking about his mother, who thought that creativity was like everything else you did in your life. Whether you went out to dinner, whether you had a party, whether you took your son to school. Music is part of life. And it's as normal as life, and the unpredictability of your own life, because you don't know what's going to happen next. So Christian's music actually allows us to find a way into sound that has to do with our own life, which is so unpredictable. We are allowed to control the instruments. That's what we do, we're musicians. But part of that is being able to give up the control and to be able to communicate with each other. So some of the stuff we're going to demonstrate for you today, I think, will take you maybe into this very strange space that should be normal, because it is, but is not always what we think about in everyday life.
So Robyn and I are going to perform for you parts of Quartet by Christian Wolff, and I'm going to read the instructions to Robyn quickly so that we can give you an example of what the players are told before they perform. So for Quartet, each player chooses 7 sound sources to be struck in ascending order of resonance, with 1 being the lowest resonance and 7 the highest. A range of resonance may vary, i.e. 7 needn't be the most resonant sound imaginable, but the average range among the 4 players should be more or less similar. The duration of each sound equals the time it takes for the sound to die out completely. Lines between numbers mean legato within one part, or to hock it between two parts, so to alternate back and forth. That is, play the next sound after the first is struck as soon as you no longer hear the first sound. Wedges, which Robyn calls the carrot top shapes, mark a pause, a silence of free indefinite duration. There are no dynamics. Where no dynamics are indicated, they are free and will, of course, affect the duration. The pairs of players, 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, proceed independently, except that each section, A, B, C, and D, should be started more or less together. Repeats of A and B are optional, but not of D.